Ever thrown the word swagger into a conversation? Or maybe you've used the phrase star-crossed lovers. You might be surprised to learn that you're channeling a little bit of Shakespeare without even realizing it.
It's true. His impact on the English language is huge,
Yeah.
going way beyond a few famous lines.
Right. It's like we all know Romeo and Juliet, but what's really interesting is how Shakespeare used this play to introduce all these words and phrases that have become so, I don't know, so ingrained in our language that we don't even think about where they came from.
Precisely. Take the word swagger, for example.
Hmm.
It first pops up in Romeo and Juliet, and it's like this perfect example of how Shakespeare didn't just use language, he played with it. He had this knack for capturing a feeling or an image with a single word.
Yeah. Swagger just has that that instant impact, that visual element that makes you think of, how should I put it, a certain confidence and a certain flair. And that's Shakespeare. He could really pinpoint the most evocative way to say something.
Absolutely. And it wasn't just about being flashy either. Think about the phrase star-crossed lovers. Introduced in the prologue of Romeo and Juliet, it instantly sets this mood, this feeling of tragedy right from the start. It hints at all the challenges and obstacles that the lovers are going to face.
It really sticks with you. But what about his more poetic language? Does that stuff actually have an impact on how we speak, normally?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
One of the key elements of Shakespeare's writing is his use of iambic pentameter. Now, I know that might sound a little technical, but
A little bit. But before you explain, tell me, why should we care about iambic pentameter?
because it's everywhere. It's like the DNA of English sentences. We're naturally drawn to that flow, even in everyday speech. Shakespeare was a master of it.
Okay, you've got me intrigued, but I think I need a little more help understanding what it actually is.
Think of it as a pattern of stressed and unstressed syllables, like that famous line, but soft. What light through yonder window breaks. Hear how it creates this natural rise and fall, this rhythm that just pulls you in. That's iambic pentameter.
Okay, I think I'm starting to. It's like he's composing music with his words.
Exactly. And that's a big part of why his work has had such a lasting impact. That innate rhythm, that musicality, it's something we respond to on a subconscious level, whether we realize it or not.
So it's not just about understanding the words themselves, it's about the way they flow together, the rhythm and the melody of the language.
Exactly. And that's one of the key reasons why Shakespeare's influence goes far beyond just the words he invented. He really tapped into something fundamental about the way we use and experience language, and that's a big part of what makes his work so timeless.
So we've been talking about the technical side of Shakespeare's writing, the words he invented and how he structured his sentences. But let's get into the emotional impact of his work. Romeo and Juliet isn't just about pretty words, right? It's the story about love and loss and some seriously intense family drama.
Absolutely.
So how does Shakespeare use language to tackle these big universal themes?
That's a great question. And it gets at the heart of Shakespeare's genius, I think. He was able to capture such a wide range of human emotions, from the highs of love to the depths of grief and despair.
And he did not hold back. Some of the lines in Romeo and Juliet are brutal, like a plague on both your houses. Not exactly something you'd expect to find on a Valentine's Day card, right?
Right. But
Yeah.
that's
Yep.
part of what makes it so powerful.
Yeah.
He's tapping into these really raw, visceral emotions, and he's not afraid to go there. That line, a plague on both your houses, it's become this cultural touchstone, a way to express that feeling when you're just fed up, stuck between a rock and a hard place.
It's like he gave us the words for all those complicated feelings that we all have, but don't always know how to put into words. And it's not just the big dramatic stuff either. Even the descriptions, those metaphors, they add this whole other layer to the emotional landscape of the play.
Absolutely. Think about the way he describes love, for example. It's not all sunshine and roses. He compares it to things like a smoke made with the fume of sighs, a madness, even a consuming fire.
Wow.
These metaphors, they're unexpected, almost jarring, but they really get under your skin and stay with you.
Yeah, they do. And you're right, they're not the typical flowery kind of metaphors you might expect in a traditional love story, but that's what makes them work. It's like he's showing us that love isn't always pretty, right? That it can be messy and complicated and a little bit scary even.
Exactly. And that's the mark of a great writer, wouldn't you say? This ability to take those complicated feelings, those universal experiences, and find these new ways to express them.
For sure. It's like he's holding up this mirror to human nature,
Right.
showing us all sides of it and giving us a language to understand it.
Yes. And what's amazing is that those themes, those emotions, they still resonate with us today just as much as they did hundreds of years ago. that says a lot about Shakespeare's work.
It really does. But how did Romeo and Juliet, this one play written for a very particular audience, back in the day, become so universal? How did it go from, like, the Globe Theater to being performed and studied all over the world?
That's a fascinating question. And it really speaks to the power of a good story. Some stories, some characters, they have this ability to go beyond their cultural and historical context and connect with people on a much deeper level.
So we've talked about the timeless themes, the emotional depth of Romeo and Juliet, but how did this one play written over 400 years ago become, I don't know, such a global phenomenon?
Well, it's important to remember that Shakespeare wasn't writing for some niche audience back then. His plays, Romeo and Juliet especially, they were incredibly popular. People from all walks of life went to the Globe Theater to see them.
So it wasn't just like the literary elite who were into his work?
No, not at all. Shakespeare really had this amazing ability to write for everyone. His plays were witty, dramatic, full of intrigue, and the characters were relatable. People connected with them no matter their background.
That's so cool to think about those early performances, like the energy of the crowd, the way that language would have just come alive on stage. But how did that translate into a lasting impact on, well, on the English language itself?
It's a process, almost like cultural osmosis, I guess you could say. As Romeo and Juliet was performed over and over, the language started to sink in. Actors, writers, even everyday people, they began using Shakespeare's phrases, metaphors, those turns of phrase in their own speech and writing.
So it's like his words became part of the culture woven into how people express themselves, right?
Exactly. And then as English spread across the world through exploration, colonization, trade, all of that, Shakespeare's influence went with it. His work became part of the literary canon, studied in schools and universities. It just solidified his impact even more.
Wow, it's like this crazy ripple effect, starting in a playhouse in London and then reaching every corner of the world.
Precisely. And it shows just how powerful words can be. They transcend time, they transcend place, and it goes beyond English even. Romeo and Juliet has been translated into so many languages, bringing Shakespeare to entirely new audiences.
That's incredible to think that something written back in Elizabethan England could still resonate with people in such different cultures, different times.
It speaks to, I think, the universality of human experience, the themes of love, loss, conflict, family drama. These are things that resonate with people no matter where they come from or what language they speak.
It really makes you realize that even though the world changes, people, not so much.
Exactly. And Shakespeare, he had this incredible ability to see into the heart of what makes us human. To articulate those experiences in a way that feels so timeless and so personal.
It's like he's talking to us across the centuries, right? Reminding us that we're all connected by these shared experiences, these human truths.
That's it. And that's what's so amazing about studying Shakespeare. It's not just about these old texts. It's about understanding ourselves better, understanding language, and realizing how powerful words are, how they shape our world.
So next time you find yourself using a Shakespearean phrase, maybe it's star-crossed lovers, maybe it's a plague on both your houses, whatever it is, remember that you're tapping into this rich history of language, a connection to Shakespeare himself, and centuries of expression. Something to think about.